So, what actually drives a community's growth over time? Is it infrastructure, workforce, leadership, or is it how all those pieces come together? Welcome to Powering Growth, presented by ElectriCities, where we explore how North Carolina communities grow, adapt, and compete in a changing economy. Each episode, we talk with people shaping economic development from the ground level to the global stage. Today, we're joined by Patrick Pierce, Director of Economic and Business Development for North Carolina Railroad Company, to talk about rail and industrial site readiness. Patrick, welcome to Powering Growth.
Hi, Casey. How are you?
Good. All right, so let's jump in.
Okay.
For listeners who may not know, what is the role of North Carolina Railroad in economic development?
It's a great question. So North Carolina Railroad may or may not know. So we're a private company owned by the state of North Carolina. So we own the corridor from Charlotte to Greensboro out to Morehead City. So we don't operate trains. Norfolk Southern and Amtrak do on our line, but we own the corridor. So really, our goal is to be a catalyst for economic growth throughout the state. And from the programs that we run are really focus on site control, due diligence, site readiness, product development, and then end user grants when companies select North Carolina. So really what our goal is at the end of the day is to be a strong partner for our communities in North Carolina, for the state, and then, work well with others like, our utility partners, private companies, and, folks like ElectriCities. So,
Which we love.
yeah.
And how does rail access factor right now into kind of modern industrial site selection?
So you're seeing more primary industries, reshoring or reinforcing supply chains, which means that rail is really important because rail is good for moving a lot of stuff, heavy stuff, primarily long distances. So when we talk to site selectors, anecdotally say rail is becoming more and more important when they're working with their clients. And I was going back through Economic Development Partnership, EDP&C, their data that they put out every year. I looked for last year, so I've got these written down here because I wanted to get some percentages here. So, but 2024 for their report, only a fifth of building requests and about a third of site requests required rail. In just a year's time, the building requests raised to 28%. And site requests were almost 50%. So that's a huge increase just year over year. So that really, I think, bears that out. So we don't see that really slowing down in terms of the importance of rail moving forward. So that means that shell buildings and shovel-ready locations are really important. So our programs like Build Ready sites are really important, and from to be ready and to help move forward business recruit here. It also means that we've had to be creative in the ways that we have looked at, how are we going to help meet this need? So one, we launched a brownfields program. So a lot of focus on greenfields in the state, but we also said, hey, we've got existing industrial sites. We've got a long industrial history in this state. How do we help take some of those sites that were rail served, that have a lot of the infrastructure there, are already in industrial areas? How do we help transform those into new sites? And, so we've got a program there that'll help communities that are looking to take one of those sites, get it in the state's DEQ, Department of Environmental Quality, their brownfields program, get it out, do the remediation, and make it an active industrial site. A second thing we've done is our Build Ready site program, which focus on greenfields. We've actually lowered the threshold there on what is required to get into the program. So now it's 35 acres that can handle a 200,000 square foot rail served building. So that's useful from where it was. And the third is really our NCRR Invest grants. We have helped communities look at, smaller communities look at buildings that they could repurpose and make rail served. And we've had that, some great success across the state in being able to do that. So they may be, singles and doubles, but we think especially in smaller communities, singles and doubles can be home runs. And that's that's something that's great. So, and obviously, I appreciate all your help as we've gone through this and your team here at ElectriCities in terms of trying to look at that.
Yeah, and I think we've done the same thing when you look at some of those certified site programs and things like
Hmm.
that, is being more flexible in the requirements for those, allowing maybe there is a great smaller site, but it doesn't meet the acreage requirement. So
Yep.
being a little more flexible with some of those to make sure that those due diligence on that site is done as well. You mentioned the increase in the number of projects that are requiring rail.
Hmm.
Do you have an inclination as to why those project numbers have increased so much?
Like I said, I think it's really about, you look at, the concept of reshoring, you look at
Mhm.
wanting to solidify supply chains and do some of that. I think that that's really driven that need to bring some of that supply chain onshore here. So that's why. And again, if you're doing more primary industries and basic things like that, that often requires, heavy things, lots of raw material, those sorts of things that I think previously might have been done, you know, elsewhere.
Yeah. All right. So we're going to kind of talk more about logistics. We often talk about the big wins, the new factories, but they don't happen without tracks and the power lines. How critical is rail infrastructure to securing these massive FDI projects?
Well, infrastructure is obviously absolutely critical, whether that's rail, whether that's water, sewer, whether that's power. All these things are really important factors as these companies are looking to make these large investments here. If you look at where our NCR Invest program has made investments, a lot of those projects are FDI projects. So um, clearly, rail is an important piece. Um, I guess as a cautionary tale on that would be that a lot of other countries don't use rail and freight rail and don't have the networks built out like the US does. So when doing FDI projects, it's really important to make sure that they understand rail, they understand how they're using rail, they understand their supply chains, because it may be questions and thoughts that they haven't had to really explore in other locations. So they like the idea rail, but it's really important to do that extra due diligence, ask those extra questions, and figure out really kind of probe how it is that they're going to be using that rail to make sure that there's less surprises down the road as they're developing the site.
So, talking about kind of site development, what does a perfect site look like to an international investor today? So, specifically, how do programs like our smart sites and some of the grants you've mentioned factor into that decision making process?
I mean, speed to market is obviously really,
Definitely.
always important. Smart sites, I mean, I think is a really important, certification program. Not all certifications are created equal. So, it's always important to get the certification, but also really know your sites really well as a local economic developer. And I think, you know, really at the end of the day, it's about reducing risk or increasing certainty, however, whatever way you want to look at that, and really limit the amount of surprises there's always going to be surprises in a project. There's no way to get around it. But if you can limit those and really show how this, your site de-risks their investment, that's always, extremely helpful. I think a perfect site, obviously it's cleared, it's graded, it's pad ready, all the utilities are there, all the utility conflicts have been resolved. There's no mystery easements running through, like a title search has been done. Is it, directly with rail? It's important that if rails is critical and advertised on that site, that rail service has been like fully contemplated. Like
Yeah.
you've talked to your operating railroad, you understand, can it actually be served? Because sometimes a rail line will run next to a site, but if there's a 20-foot difference in grade between where the site is and where the rail is, it may be difficult to get that on there. Understanding your utility conflicts. If do you have to go under power lines? Do you have to go over natural gas lines? All those sorts of things are really important considerations to help de-risk those sites, especially as it comes to rail.
Yeah, I was going to ask because you just happened to talk about kind of site readiness and stuff. Specifically, I know that we've worked on some sites where there is rail adjacent to the site,
Yes.
but adjacent doesn't always mean that the site can be served by rail.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about if an economic developer or a community has a site? with that rail, what does that process kind of look like? Or like, where should they start to really kind of figure out if it can be served? And then, like, what are some of those contributing factors in terms of like, is it a quantity of cars?
Yeah.
How does that all work?
Yeah. Well, I would say start, we're always a great resource. We will work with any of our communities. If they've got a site they think might be able to be rail served, they can always reach out. We can help with, conceptual maps and kind of doing the desktop analysis on a site to figure out whether that works. And work through some of the potential issues. The class one railroads or your short line railroads are always a great option as well. But you know, we consider ourselves to be one of those resources to do that. So whether they're reaching out to the class one or the short line or reaching to us, that's an important piece. Rails tend to like to be on flat surfaces. They don't like huge grade changes. It can be sometimes you can get rail there, but it is cost prohibitive.
Sure.
So, depending on how many cars a customer might want to use on a site may dictate the amount of infrastructure that you want to be able to, if it's going to require a $10 million bridge to get there, that may not make sense for something that's not using a lot of volume. That said, if it's a huge rail user, that's going to make sense for everyone because, the juice is worth the squeeze essentially to build um, that kind of infrastructure to be able to serve the site. So those are some of the things. Like I said, utility conflicts though are like one of the huge things I cannot stress enough in terms of thinking about rail on a site because there's a lot of coordination that goes into how you address those, and it takes more time than folks think than to get a piece of rail onto a site.
And so those utility constrictions
Yeah.
that you talked about, is that really just kind of in terms of like height of power lines, or there's some other things to take into
It can be
consideration?
height of power lines. If you've got water lines that run along
Mm,
there, if you're rolling what a train, I think is gross weight is like 286,000 pounds. So if you've got PVC line,
mm,
if it's not at a certain depth, if it's not encased, in a seal
gotcha.
sheet, you're going to crack water lines, natural gas lines. Obviously, no one wants gas leaks. And even just the property rights issue, the fact that a lot of these companies have easements. So if they've got an easement, that rail's got to go across someone else's easement. So there's just there's the piece there in terms of how that access and how they protect their assets and their investments they've made in terms of the utilities. So, but all those things, as we know, take time
Yeah.
to resolve. So that's a key piece I think that economic developers that are looking to develop a rail site can get in front of.
That's great. I appreciate that information because I don't think we run into a lot of those
Mhm.
issues with power as well. They assume because a substation or something, has X number capacity that
Yes.
they can automatically get that, and that's not always how that works.
Yeah, and even having to get the right of way, having to actually be able to
Yep.
get the transmission lines from one place to another, that's a that's not as easy as it seems.
It's not.
Not just stringing wires.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I know that you've worked in diverse markets like Seattle and now in North Carolina. What do you see as the greatest competitive advantage for North Carolina? And specifically, how does public power allow a community to be more agile in its growth? And we should probably add the caveat here that before the North Carolina Railroad,
Hmm.
you worked in a public power
I did
community.
work in a public power community. That's very true. No, that's a really good question. I would say one huge advantage from where I was before is that utilities are really active in North Carolina, and I think that is a huge benefit to economic developers. I mean, they were always engaged in what we were doing. Back on the West Coast, but they were not driving product development initiatives like they are here. They were not as hands on. So that's a huge advantage to be able to leverage. Um, I mean, obviously, just the depth of economic developers we have here, I think, is a huge advantage in North Carolina. And I think from a public power standpoint, I mean, if you've got a well resourced public utility that is close to um, that can make the investments. They can align their investments with their comprehensive plans, with their economic development plans, and can really, they can kind of align all of those resources accordingly. That can be a huge win. And obviously being able to work with you all to leverage your resources to be able to do some of those things, that's a huge advantage. I actually want to ask you, how do you kind of message that with the local communities? How do you think about that from a public power?
Yeah, I mean, I think the competitive advantage for us for public power is just that your linemen live and work in your
Yeah,
community.
that's right.
I think that's one of the biggest advantages is just understanding that they're there.
Mm-hmm.
And so when power goes out, which inevitably it will happen, that time to getting your power back is so much smaller.
Yeah.
And it's not calling, a 1-800 number. You're calling a city. You're talking to someone directly who's in your community and who's likely, going through the same thing you are with having a power outage. So they get it.
Yep.
Like you said, we really appreciate working with our partners and being able, especially with the site readiness programs that we both manage. I think it's such a great asset to our communities to be able to partner both of them together and they're not exclusive
Mm-hmm.
so that we can make a lot of these sites that are ready for industrial development go further.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But now I'm going to turn it back on you.
Okay.
So, how do utilities and organizations like NC Railroad work together behind the scenes to make communities shovel ready and be the first phone call before the project comes in?
Mm. Well, I mean, I think some of the meetings that we've had is a great starting point,
Yeah.
right? And I think, continuing to meet and figure out how we can take the programs we have and pair them together, how we can use, everyone comes at it with a little different lens. Obviously, we're primarily, focused on rail sites, although I did not mention previously our micro grants for anyone out there. Any industrial site can get up to $50,000 for due diligence. So that's a huge thing. But we've leveraged that before. We've leveraged that in situations where maybe you were all coming up against, either a cap on your funding or
Yeah.
some sort of restriction that, hey, we're able to fill the gap with something and be able to make our dollars all go further. And if we can help think about ways to really focus on the end goal, and the end goal is landing those jobs, landing that company, getting
Yeah.
those jobs, growing the tax base, growing the rail car volume, growing the energy, all those things that make, like checking all those boxes for everyone. If we can keep that end goal in mind, we can all really do great things together. And I think the partnership that you see in North Carolina and with communities and the allies like us are just, I think that's a huge strategic advantage for us.
I would agree. What is one thing every industrial site should have before it's marketed?
I'm a huge, this is going to be maybe off the wall, but
Uh-oh.
I mean, not that off the wall. I think a boundary survey and a title search.
Interesting.
I think understanding the amount of times when I was a local developer that I would run into a piece of property where there was some easement that no one knew about, or there was a, you know, natural gas line 40 years ago that you had to find on a title search that actually people didn't know about and
Yeah.
held up a project for 6 months because they found it. And then it's like, oh, what do we do about this now? So I think that's a huge, from a de-risking standpoint.
Yeah.
I think it's a huge advantage to be able to have a site do that before you go to market.
I would agree. I would also say some sort of marketing flyer
Mm-hmm.
or just information and thinking through. I would often take like a past RFI
Yeah.
and look at the gaps that I had
Yep.
and work to fill those in and then put those on the flyer. I will caveat that with always put an as of date because
Yes.
I know for us and probably for the
Mhm.
rail as well, things change.
That's right.
And so while it may have had 6 megawatts or something like that available a year ago, housing developments come online and
That's
things
right.
like that. And so that number can change.
Mm-hmm.
But I think just knowing the information on your site and looking at what past site selectors or anything else have asked for and filling in those blanks. So next time it really is a copy and paste,
Yep.
send it as it is.
No, that's really good too, because I think you get, especially local communities working with elected officials and things like that, that having marketing materials like that helps you make sure that you're all focused and getting that alignment on approved plans and things like that. That way, you're really making sure that what your marketing and what your advertising is actually where the direction the community is going, which is what you got to make sure you're doing.
Absolutely. All right. So, ready for the rapid fire question?
I'm ready for rapid fire.
All right. Beach or mountains?
I'm pretty pale. I got to go mountains.
East Coast or West Coast?
Oh, don't make me answer that.
You have to.
Well, I'm here, so I'm going East Coast.
There you go. All right, last one. You ready?
Okay.
This is a dividing line. Coke or Pepsi?
Diet Dr. Pepper?
Acceptable. All right. Well, thank you, Patrick, for joining us today. Please let our listeners know where they can find out more about you or how to reach you.
Absolutely. So NCRR.com is where you can get information about the company and all of our economic development programs. We're active on LinkedIn and kind of all the normal spots. So come see us there and look forward to working with you.
Thank you for listening to Powering Growth presented by ElectriCities. You can find out more about ElectriCities at electricities.com. Tune in for our next episode.